Welcome to the Business Talk, a global podcast series that highlights distinguished faculty members and their impactful scholarly contributions. I'm Deepak, your host from India. Today we are delighted to welcome Dr. Lindy Greer, Professor of Management and Organizations at the Stephen M. Ross School of Business and Faculty Director of the Sanger Leadership Center of University of Michigan, as our distinguished guest on this episode. Before we get started, I would like to introduce today's guest. Professor Lindy Greer's research and teaching focus on the dynamics of high-performing teams and effective leadership. A globally recognized scholar, her work is published in top academic journals, including Science and the Academy of Management Journal. She also designs leadership programs for senior executives at leading organizations such as Amazon, Google, and Toyota. Professor Gear is celebrated for her academic excellence and real-world impact, earning honors from Poet and Pons, Thinkers 50, and Michigan Ross Executive Education. She received her BS from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania and her PhD in Social and Organizational Psychology from the Leiden University in the Netherlands, joining the Ross faculty in 2019. In today's episode, Professor Lindy Greer shares key insights from her acclaimed research, team hierarchical adaptability, benefits for team coordination and performance. Let's not keep you waiting. Please join me in welcoming Professor Lindy Greer to the conversation. Professor Lindy, it's a distinguished privilege to welcome you to Business Talk. We are grateful for you accepting our invitation.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Professor introduced the idea of team hierarchical adaptability in this paper. How would you explain that concept to a manager who has never heard the term before?
So, in the way that I explain it when I teach, I love to talk about hippos. Highest paid people in the organization are hippopotamus, second most deadly animal in the world, right? And good hippos, they know when to be out of water, activating the hierarchy, taking charge, protecting the team, managing perimeters. Choose your version of showing power. But the exact same teams, exact same hippos, also know how to relax, maybe go underwater, just their ears above, letting the other hippos engage in conversation without them as big hippo getting in the way. And the best teams, they're like this. They can fluidly, rapidly move in and out of moments where they engage in more command and control mode, as well as in more flat brainstorm mode. They're able to shape shift the shape of power in their team. Another way to think about this is I got onto this line of research when I was talking to a Navy SEAL and asking how they navigated hierarchy and power and their teams. And the SEAL had this great story of like, well, if we're on a mission, it's very much command and control mode, hierarchy time. One hippo out of water calls the shots. If someone says go left, you go left. You don't devil's advocate at that point. There's one person taking the lead. But exact same team when they go back to base to debrief, they literally take off their stripe and rank from their shirt, things I didn't know on Velcro, and they literally strip off the hierarchy. They go into a room, sit around a round table, and everybody is expected to now engage as equals. Everybody should speak up, everybody should share. Could be the most junior person on the team saw a sniper in the distance no one else saw. Now it's mission critical not to follow the lead, but actually to make space for everybody to speak up, which means as the hippo, the commander there, has to do a really good job of making him or herself smaller, giving space for others, encouraging them to speak up. When they go back out the door, make a decision to do the next mission, they literally go out, put stripes back on, and they step into hierarchy again. And so in this research that you mentioned, we really wanted to see, could normal teams do this? Could they step in and out of hierarchy and flatness equally? And we found some teams could. Some teams did have the capability to do this. Others get stuck. Some teams are always hierarchical. The boss is always bossy. Other teams are chaotic flatness, groups of startup founders, so they haven't decided who's going to lead yet, and nothing gets done. The best teams, though, they know how to move in between both.
Professor, many leaders feel they must choose between a flat or hierarchical team structure. What did your research reveal about why this either or thinking is limiting?
Yeah, for the longest time, this is how research went, and even company structure. You had a formal org chart or you did holacracy, like Tony Hsieh at Zappos. You got rid of the hierarchy in the org chart and you had these weird cross-functional teams and this manual to navigate. No one could find the answer. And so when I did a meta-analysis to try to compare this either or choice to see who was right, where you put together all the data sets anybody's ever collected in hierarchy and performance, we found basically the effect was zero. That it is very equivocal that this choice, there isn't a right or wrong answer. And so then I was like, okay, well, maybe you need to have both at the same time. That's one way to manage paradox of maybe you need to be able to simultaneously have a hierarchy and feel flat, but that didn't work in the data. And so eventually I stumbled on this idea of how do you manage paradox, like needing both hierarchy and flatness, is if you split it over time. So a little bit of hierarchy now, a little bit of flat now, a little bit of hierarchy. And that thinking led me to start to think through, okay, maybe this choice is wrong because we're not thinking about how it could be dynamic. Most of the time when we say things like structure in organizations, we think of something written in stone that never moves. And especially now in this modern era of high-speed collaboration, things do need to move. We need to move, our teams need to move. And so that thinking of more of a temporal overtime dynamic perspective allowed me to find a way to step out of this forced choice and start to think about what other options do we have, including this ability to shapeshift our teams as the situation changes.
Professor, across your five multi-method studies, what was
Mhm.
surprising you about how adaptable teams actually shift influence and decision making in practice?
Oh, there's so many things that surprised me. One was how often they shift. It's not even initially similar to my initial black and white thinking. I thought, okay, they have hierarchy and now they have flatness. 10 minutes of hierarchy, 20 minutes of flatness. And the reality in our data, say, for example, when we video coded a whole meeting of a team interaction, was it was constantly in flux. That you would kick off the meeting with a leader. Here's why we're here today. Hierarchy hit level 6. Leader sits down, says, what do you all think? Everybody now is equally flat. Say everybody has a power level of 3. But then 2 minutes later, someone starts to speak too long. And so then the hierarchy shifts that way. Formal leader has to step in at that point and be like, hey, let someone else talk. And so there's this little blip, if you will, of hierarchy a few minutes in as you're facilitating the meeting, trying to use a little bit of power, a little bit of hierarchy to keep the team equal. We found that it's actually really hard to maintain a state of true equal participation and engagement. It takes active management and these little bursts of hierarchy now and then to get the one person to talk less or the other person to talk a little more. And so you maintain it, but with little blips. And then at the end, the hierarchy comes up more strongly. But it was not either we were hierarchy or we were flat. It was more so big variations and at times little variations in how relatively hierarchical or flat we were and how we engaged. The other thing that surprised me was the disconnect between what we think we're doing as leaders and how our team sees it. And some of the teams that were more stuck that we observed in our observation studies, the leader felt like he was giving space or she was giving space to the team to be flat. And the team looked at the leader like, no, you're a big hippo out of water. Like, there's no room for us to speak up. The leader would think that just because I asked a question, that was enough. But we show power and activate hierarchy in 100 ways. It's where we sit at the table. It's the tone of the voice. It's the words we use when we ask the question. And often as leaders, we're not self-aware enough to know if others truly see us as creating that space for flatness. We think if we pull one lever, we're there, but you honestly got to pull, 100 levers at once to really crank down that power to get people to understand that you truly mean it when you say you want people to engage and speak up.
Professor, you show that teams that can flex between command and control and flat
Mhm.
collaboration coordinate better and perform at
Mhm.
higher levels. What does that flexible shift look like in a real team meeting or project?
Yeah, so many different ways I can do this. When we're working in a project, it might mean that we're more have a little bit of hierarchy up front as whoever's owning the project clarifies the goals and roles of what the project will be. And then we might have a little bit more flatness as each of us goes off on our own to do our own task. And then we come back together again and we might have some more flatness. Now we're brainstorming about how our pieces come together. If we get into a debate or we get stuck, you might have a little bit of hierarchy to resolve that, a leader who might step in, offer opinions, and lean out again. And the end of the debate, ideally, then the leader stands up and decides based on what everybody found, and the integration of all those, the pre-work that everybody else did, the leader decides to take a decision. We find that in most meetings that you have a pretty reliable hippo arc, and it's true for most longer term projects as well. And by hippo arc, I mean you start out of water, you clarify goals and roles, push it down for flatness, for us to brainstorm, maybe do a little bit of individual work. And then at the end of the project or the meeting, you end back in hierarchy of, okay, based on what just happened, here's the next step.
Professor, your work distinguishes the formal hierarchy on paper from the
Mhm.
influence hierarchy that changes across tasks. How can leaders become more aware of this informal influence shift in their teams?
I love that question. It's so important, for all of us, myself included. It's not easy to see how others see you. Especially when you've been in a leadership position over a longer time, power changes our brain. There's cool work in neuroscience showing that if you tell someone on a piece of paper you're a manager, brain immediately wires differently. Just reading a piece of paper saying that you're a leader or a manager. What does your brain do? Well, it gets more approach oriented. You speak more, you do more, you talk more, right? And so then imagine leaders who've been in leadership positions 2 years, 10 years, 20 years. Your brain is permanently on power. You talk, you lead, you're out of water, and you're big, and you don't realize it because it's just the way that you get used to thinking and to being and behaving. And so, in order to have eyes on you, of course, I am a huge advocate of coaching, but a coach can only hear what you tell them, right? Unless you let them actually come into a meeting, which is pro tip. In the lieu of that, though, telling your team you're working on yourself is one of the best things you can do for so many reasons. One, it allows your team to see that you're trying to grow, which helps them grow, makes the entire team more open for feedback and learning. Additionally, it allows you to get feedback of what's working and what isn't. I know in my team at one point, I run leadership development for Michigan Ross internally, have my own leadership team, and 8 layers of hierarchy. And so I was trying to do a better job of creating space for others. So one meeting, I told my team before the meeting, today I'm going to ask more questions. So I went through the meeting, and every time someone shared, I was like, why? 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 Very proud of myself at the end of the meeting. I asked the team, well, so how was that? Did everybody feel, more empowered? And they're like, that was awful. Well, why? Like, that might be the issue. Normal people, when they ask questions that are thoughtful, use more words than just why. Maybe scientists talk that way, but like for normal people, could you say something like, could you walk me through your thinking? And so if you tell your team you're working on yourself, it helps them see that you're learning, helps them learn, but also gives you feedback. Helps you see that if you pulled a lever, it works or it doesn't, and get tips and ideas from people who are actually in the room with you. If you're uncomfortable to share with the whole team, maybe at least have one person in the team you trust to be that person to give you feedback, where you let them know the types of experiments you're trying to do interpersonally and ask them for feedback afterwards.
Professor, when does a more hierarchical mode help teams execute? And when does a flatter mode better support brainstorming and creativity according to your findings?
So, broadly stated, hierarchy mode is best when we need to converge. We need to go in the same direction as a team. This could be micro moments, like where we need to resolve a conflict and come to a single decision, converge on an answer. It could be around norms. Say we have a norm right now of flatness. Someone's breaking it. We need a little bit of hierarchy then to converge back to behaving in line with our norms or our culture as a team. If there's a crisis from outside and we all need to be able to align in how we react, you need a little bit of hierarchy to help you get on the same page. To make a decision where we need to converge and decide on the one way we as a team are going to go forward, we need a little bit of hierarchy. Situations in which you need flatness are when we need to have different ideas. We need to diverge. And so you have the more prototypical situations like innovation. Anytime you're trying to come up with a new idea for a new product or a new strategy, of course you need different ideas. However, I think teams also underestimate how much you need that type of ideation day to day. Anytime I take a decision as a manager, I need ideas from others. I don't ever have the full picture. Everybody else could have pieces too. And minimally, I may have assumptions or biases in what I have, and I need people to challenge that. So anytime that you're taking a decision of any form of complexity, having space for flatness for people to challenge and offer different ideas, pieces of the puzzle, really critical.
Professor, you collected both field data from intact teams and evidence from lab experiments.
Mhm.
What did using these different methods allow you to see that one method alone might have missed?
Yeah, so for me, I was raised by a scholar who believed in multi-method research. She studied anthropology as well as management science, and so really believed in looking at things from different perspectives or triangulating. The more that we have data from different angles, different perspective points, the more we get closer to truth. Similarly to how my view of myself in a team may look very different how my team sees me, both views together get closer to truth. And so when you do both a field study and a lab study, again, it's two different ways of looking at the same issue. The upside of, say, field work of going into organizations that look at this is, what happens in real life. As a psychologist, it can be easy at times to manufacture scenarios or ideas that may never actually happen in the real world. So going into the world, seeing that it happens there, having data to show that, especially in a diversity of industries and team types. For example, in our paper, we looked at teams in the real world. Some teams had formal hierarchy in a fitness organization. Other teams didn't have a formal hierarchy. There were student groups in a startup idea competition. We were able to find that teams that could shift between hierarchy and flat did better in both types of situations. Organizations that had a formal hierarchy and even organizations that didn't. Both types of teams both organizations where teams could shift, those teams did better. Lab experiments then allow us to show causality, to show that this is really why performance happens. It's not this or that or a hundred other things, but if you hold everything else constant, you bring a group of people into the lab, they do the same task with the same information, the same constraints, the same type of students, and the only thing that you change is whether they're instructed to flex the hierarchy or keep it constant or keep flat constant. You're able to have a lot more conclusive proof of what's really going on than you ever could achieve in the field. And so by putting those two things together, you get closer to hopefully a recommendation that would work for most people in most organizations.
Professor, how can a team that is currently very rigid, either always hierarchical or always flat, start building this capability for hierarchical adaptability step by step?
Part one is just raising awareness of the need for it. Most of the times the teams don't do this, it's not out of ill attempt or someone saying, I love hierarchy, or even, I want chaos on the flat teams. It's usually coming from just not knowing that this is possible and that it's a better way. So just being able to explain the concept to your team over, there's times when we need to be in command and control mode. And it's important there's times we can all really engage as equals. It's not an either or, it's a yes and bringing awareness. Part one, whenever you're teaching a new tool or idea like this, I find play is helpful. Hence, I love the hippopotamus as a way to play with this. Some of my clients from my executive education go home and they'll have like a stuffed hippopotamus on the table to remind people to be self-aware. Where should I be as a hippo right now? Should I be out of water? Should I be underwater and listening? That's one way to get started. From there, then, it's often easier to stay working on this if you build in systems or processes. Personally, I love meeting agendas as a way to scaffold in flexes in the hierarchy. So, for example, in a meeting agenda, you have a decision coming up, and you could timestamp it to say, okay, 5 minutes, Deepak's leading. He's going to kick it off, clarify goals and roles. And then we have 20 minutes for a debate. We're going to have a devil's advocate. We're going to consider different ideas, 20 minutes. And then after that on the agenda, you could say 5 minutes. Deepak is going to be the one to decide. He's going to give us our action, goals, next steps. And so if it's on the agenda, people know to expect the pivot in between flexing and hierarchy. They're more likely to do it. And other teams as well, because that step into flatness especially is hard. Having artifacts can help. For example, the Navy SEALs, they took off their stripes and rank as an additional signal. And hospital teams, sometimes when they do an after action review to step out of hierarchy and go flat, they'll take off their scrubs because scrubs often have different colors that indicate hierarchy. In other teams, some of the startups that I've worked with, they'll have a prop, like a basketball or a football, that they'll bring out when they want to be flat. And whoever holds the football can speak openly and everybody has to listen as a way to also further help people remember how to do this. So it starts with talking about it and then trying to build in systems, artifacts, rituals, routines that make it really easy, that it's not a conscious effort, but we built a system around us that gently pushes us in and out of hierarchy and flat as we go.
Professor, your earlier meta-analytic work showed that hierarchy can sometimes hurt the team effectiveness by fueling
Mhm.
conflict.
Mhm.
How does hierarchical adaptability change the story about when
Mhm.
hierarchy helps versus harms?
It's interesting. In some new research we have, a qualitative project we've been working on, we find that when teams that are hierarchical can have a little bit of flatness now and then, it makes people accept, respect, and legitimize the hierarchy more. We tend to resent the hierarchy, to fight over rank in it the most when we don't think it's fair. But if we know that our boss is going to flatten the hierarchy now and then and take our opinions and use it in their decision, we're a lot more respectful of the hierarchy.
Professor, I'd like to conclude this episode with one last question. If a
Mm,
listener could make just one change this week to help
mm,
their team adapt its hierarchy better across all the tasks, what
mm.
practical experiment would you suggest they try?
Better agendas. Having agendas that specify what you want from the team. Are you coming together for one-way communication for someone to talk at you where you need hierarchy? Or are you coming together to brainstorm? Then you need flatness. Or are you coming together for deciding, in which case you need hierarchy, flat hierarchy? But better agendas often is the easiest tool. I also love post-its too. So flat's a harder flex. The next time you want to go brainstorm, bring some post-its. Makes it easier for everybody to speak up.
Thank you very much, Professor Lindy Greer, for sharing your time and insights with us today. Your
My
perspectives on
pleasure.
leadership and high performing teams have been truly enlightening, and I am sure our audience will greatly benefit from them. We deeply appreciate the generosity in joining us and look forward to staying connected. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much.